Hello and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. This week I spoke with Frederick Hash, who is one of the co-founders of the Green Finance Observatory. The Green Finance Observatory essentially analyzes sustainable finance policy, advises decent MEPs in the European Parliament on their policies and what needs to be done. They are trying to stop the revolution of green finance that continues business as usual. So Fred joined me to lay out some of the typical mechanisms of green finance, the schemes, the plots, why they're nonsense, whether it's carbon credits, whether it's biodiversity offsetting, whether it's water pollution credits. It's a great episode and it gives a fantastic overview kind of what's going on and how governments are handing over regulation to market-based solutions, which is just a nightmare for the planet. The thing I want to touch on in this wee episode is the cognitive dissonance of the financialization of the climate crisis. So obviously, sort of the big example that people tend to know about is the carbon credit market, carbon offsetting, when a polluting company or nation buys essentially the credits of carbon that are allegedly sequestered in forests around the world. These are disastrous because these schemes that have been linked to human rights abuses, to land grabs, and also just sort of proclaiming that forests are only good for the carbon that they hold is just nightmarish and very dystopian, rather than sort of appreciating the richness of what forests are home to, biodiversity, nature. So at the same time that land is being kind of taken away from people in order to put on the market or to plant trees, at the same time that there's this push for the market to protect bits of forest around the world, the logging industry is still rampant. So our pristine tropical forests are still being cut down at a devastating rate, which is causing flooding, which is causing huge destruction, which is causing indigenous people to lose their lands, their homes, their ability to feed themselves, their history, their culture. At the same time as that, where forests are being cut down to, I don't know, make IKEA furniture, or be turned into wood pellets or whatever we think that we need in our consumerist culture. At the same time, other bits of the world are being put on to the carbon credit market because we supposedly recognize the need to protect the forests. You can only look at those two examples to see that it is obviously not about protecting forests. It is obviously about creating a commodity, another commodity, finding another way to commoditize forests, which probably were the very first thing that were commoditized. I mean, the cognitive dissonance at play there. Cutting down lots of forests, which is contributing to climate change, in order to have access to a commodity that we want to create products. Saving a whole bunch of other forests because we're worried about climate change, supposedly. And we need to sequester carbon, and it's been recognized that forests are a pretty good way of doing that. It's adding a ridiculous step into a very obvious equation, which is we need to use less. We need to produce less. We need to stop cutting down our forests for the sake of products, for the sake of consumerism. We need degrowth. We need to contract. But rather than seeing that, the financial market is kind of added in this extra step of like, oh, well, we can commoditize this. It is incredible when you lay it out like that, and devastatingly depressing. Fred then goes on to explain the biodiversity offset market, the framework for which the European Commission is currently drafting and trying to push through. The UK is doing the same. The UN is expected to announce it at the next COP. Essentially, a biodiversity offset market is the ability to financialize the destruction of nature and conflate restoration with destruction. Essentially, companies and governments will be able to destroy habitats and ecosystems and valuable spaces, natural spaces that are incredibly important to species by buying biodiversity credits. You can destroy the habitat of a species as long as you purchase the arbitrary financial value of that species habitat in credits. And then that money goes towards either restoring that particular habitat or maybe restoring another one somewhere else. The model that is being used is like for like or better. And essentially that means that you can kill off flamingos in Greece if you're saving bats in Spain, as if all of these things are interchangeable and as if our ecosystems sort of exist in separate silos and are not embedded in their own natural surroundings. It is just madness. I said at one point in the episode, first they came for the treetops, then they came for everything living below. That is how this sort of whole credit market started with carbon. Now they're coming for biodiversity. And Fred goes on to mention water pollution credits, air pollution credits. I mean, at what point is our own human existence going to be tokenized? You can imagine people are going to be able to buy energy credits. People are going to be able to buy health credits, probably not just for themselves, but for their workers, for example. That's okay. You can put the lives of your workers at risk as long as you have paid the financial value of those lives. And that money is then being put towards, I don't know, figuring out another drug for cancer or whatever. I mean, if this tokenization of health and wellness, and I mean also ecosystem wellness, continues, if we continue to allow for the financialization of every single living thing on this planet, then we will find ourselves equally financialized. And we are already in a capitalist regime that is exactly, our labor has been financialized. But soon it'll be our bodies. Soon it'll be our health. And I think those are the last two things, really. I mean, our education has been financialized, our shelter has been financialized, our health service has been financialized, our socialization has been financialized. We have to be aware of the implications of offsetting when they become a trend, i.e. moving from carbon credits to biodiversity, for example. Fred says that it is key that this debate be part of public discourse, that people know about it, that people know how they are trying to attempt or be seen to attempt to combat climate change. He also highlights that environmental regulation has a very good history of working. The ban on asbestos, for example. And yet, rather than turning to regulation, which he says the markets would then wrap themselves around and modify because capital flows to sort of the path of least resistance, governments are turning to the market for market-based solutions, which have a history of failing. It is so important that the public have a better understanding of how these markets work, how they're trying to apply them to the climate crisis, and what better solutions there are, and then that we start demanding those better solutions. The financialization of the climate crisis is the final nail in our coffin. People talk about the need for a new economic paradigm. Let's start here. To the Planet Critical community and everyone else who's joined me today, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope this was valuable to you. If you're new here, remember to subscribe. And if you're enjoying the show, do consider supporting Planet Critical on Patreon or signing up at planetcritical.com, where you can also choose a paid subscription. Supporting Planet Critical also supports my investigations into climate corruption around the world. So a huge thank you to the Planet Critical community who make all of this work possible. Thank you everyone for listening. I will see you next week.